Shalom, shalom. This is your brother Ibar, with an all new segment, and we titled it February Truth. What's not taught in the Western schools, our history is important. And I figured I'd go into this since it's so called Black History Month, just to bring out a little information that they're not teaching our youth. Because I feel that it's important. In order to know where we're going, we got to know where we come from first. And yeah, I'm gonna just show throughout this February Truth segment the things that they took out of history and what they did to us in the Western world, as well as I'm gonna touch on throughout the segment. I'm gonna touch on what was we before all this happened as well. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get into this because, like I say, I feel that it's real important that the youth learn certain stuff that we learned growing up. And yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm gonna start with this quick little 30-minute video. This is why they are banning Black history in schools. Mhm.
Throughout the history of the United States, Black Americans suffered a multitude of atrocities, including widespread and brutal massacres that occurred across the country. These massacres, often fueled by racism and white supremacy, have resulted in the deaths of countless innocent Black men, women, and children. From the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 to the MOVE bombing in 1985, these horrific events have left deep scars on the Black community and serve as a painful reminder of the systemic oppression and violence we have faced for centuries. In this video, we will examine 10 of the most devastating incidents of violence against Black Americans throughout history. These massacres resulted in the loss of countless innocent lives and left deep wounds in the Black community. We must acknowledge and learn from these tragedies in order to move towards a more just and equitable society. Let's start off with the Atlanta Massacre. The 1880s marked a turning point for Atlanta, as the bustling city became the epicenter of the regional economy. With the influx of new residents, the city's population skyrocketed from 89,000 in 1900 to a staggering 150,000 by 1910. But with this growth came a host of challenges, including increased pressure on municipal services, job competition between Black and white workers, and rising class distinctions. In response, the city's white leadership implemented restrictions designed to control the behavior of the burgeoning working class, with mixed results. However, the social intermingling of the ensuing races was a cause for concern among the city's elite whites. This led to an expansion of Jim Crow segregation, particularly in the form of separating white and Black neighborhoods, and establishing separate seating areas for public transportation. The Black population also grew significantly, from approximately 9,000 in 1880 to 35,000 by 1900, exacerbating tensions between the races. The emergence of a Black elite in Atlanta during Reconstruction led to increased racial tensions in the city. Black men gained the right to vote and began establishing businesses, social networks, and communities. However, as the Black elite gained wealth and prestige, they distanced themselves from the Black working class and saloon goers, causing discomfort among some whites. Prohibition campaigns were launched against saloons, which were blamed for rising crime rates and threats of sexual violence against white women, further fueling racial tensions. The Atlanta Race Massacre of 1906 was sparked by sensationalized newspaper reports of the alleged rapes of 4 white women by Black men. The violence, which lasted from September 22nd to September 24th, resulted in the deaths of at least 25 Black people and 2 whites. Although unofficial reports suggest a higher death toll, Black Americans were hung, shot, beaten, and stabbed to death, and white mobs destroyed homes and businesses in Black neighborhoods. The violence only ended after the intervention of the Georgia National Guard, although accusations were made against some guardsmen and the Atlanta Police Department for participating in the violence. White historians largely ignored the massacre for decades, and it was not until 2006, on its 100th anniversary, that the event was publicly marked and later made part of the state's curriculum for public schools. But the gruesome killings of Black Americans didn't stop in 1906. Just 17 years after the Atlanta Massacre, An even more traumatic event unfolded in Rosewood, a small town in Florida. In the early 1920s, the small town of Rosewood, Florida, was a thriving community of African Americans. Residents lived in relative peace and prosperity until a horrifying incident of racial violence turned their lives upside down. Everything changed on January 4th, 1923, when rumors of an alleged attack by a black man on a white woman sparked a wave of terror. Within hours, armed white mobs descended on the town, shooting at residents and burning buildings to the ground. As chaos reigned, some Rosewood residents fled to nearby swamps and sought refuge in the home of a white businessman, while others tried to fight back. One man, Sylvester Carrier, took up arms and engaged in a shootout that left 2 white men dead. News of Carrier's retaliation quickly spread.
And we're back in third quarter planning. Adams is quarterbacking this project, and she's looking pretty.
Quickly spread, and soon hundreds of white vigilantes joined the mob. The violence continued for 3 days, leaving almost all of Rosewood in ruins, and its surviving residents fleeing for their lives. Despite a grand jury investigation, no one was held accountable for the atrocities committed against the black neighborhood of Rosewood. What became known as the Rosewood Massacre of 1923 lasted several days, during which white mobs descended upon the predominantly African American town, leaving a trail of destruction and death. The violence was so extreme that virtually every building in the town was burned to the ground, leaving a scar on the community that would last for decades. The official death toll of the Rosewood Massacre in 1923 may have been recorded as only 8 people, 6 black and 2 white, but survivors' stories tell a different, much darker tale. Many claim that up to 27 black residents were killed, and that newspapers failed to report the true number of white deaths. Eyewitnesses have even spoken of a mass grave filled with black bodies, covered with a plow brought in from Cedar Key. Despite these claims, authorities were unable to confirm them, as many of the witnesses were deceased or too frail to the alleged site. The Rosewood Massacre remained a buried chapter in history for over half a century, until an investigative reporter named Gary Moore uncovered the horrific details in 1982. Survivors of the tragedy were finally able to tell their stories, leading to a renewed national interest in the incident. In 1994, the Florida legislature passed a bill to compensate the few remaining Rosewood victims for their losses, providing $150,000 in total. The tragic events of Rosewood were brought to a wider audience through the 1997 film Rosewood, directed by John Singleton. Yet again, it doesn't end here, as the series of events that led to the Springfield Massacre will leave you in greater shock. The Springfield Race Riot of 1908, also known as the Springfield Massacre, was a 2-day riot in Springfield, Illinois, on August 14th and 15th, 1908. It was a violent and deadly event that had a profound impact on the city and its residents. The riot resulted in the deaths of both black and white individuals, with estimates ranging from 5 to 40 deaths. It is said to have begun on August 14th, 1908, after 2 black men, George Richardson and Joe James, were secretly moved out of jail to avoid a lynching by a white mob. The situation escalated when a white mob gathered outside the Sangamon County Jail and demanded that the 2 men be turned over to them. The mob, which numbered in the thousands, was outraged by the idea that the accused men would be given a fair trial, and they were determined to take matters into their own hands. After the mob had unleashed its anger on the homes of black families in Springfield, they continued their violence in small communities beyond the city limits, specifically targeting stores with firearms and ammunition, directing them to destroy only homes and businesses owned by black people and that served black customers, while sparing nearby white establishments. As an act of self-defense, some black residents in Springfield fought back by returning fire when they were attacked. Scott Burton, the first victim of the lynch mob, attempted to save his home and his life by using his shotgun. William Donegan, an 84-year-old cobbler, was the second victim lynched, allegedly due to his marriage to a white woman that had tainted his reputation in the eyes of the mob. The rioting continued for 2 days, and the white mob targeted black businesses and homes, burning and looting them. The National Guard was called in to restore order. In the aftermath of the riot, many black-owned homes, businesses, and churches were destroyed, causing property damage that amounted to over $150,000 in 1908. The destruction of property and the fear of further violence forced thousands of black residents to leave Springfield, with many never returning. The aftermath of the riot left 6 black people dead, 2 lynched, and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property destroyed. The violence also caused approximately 2,000 black people to be driven out of Springfield. The Springfield Race Riot was a turning point in the fight for civil rights in the United States, as it highlighted the deep racial tensions and discrimination in American society at the time. It also led to the formation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was established in 1909 in response to this, is now recognized as a significant event in the history of the civil rights movement. And 2 years after the Springfield Massacre, there was a harrowing series of events that led to the killing of African Americans by white supremacists in Slocum. The Slocum Massacre of 1910 was a tragic event that took place in Slocum, Texas, United States. It was a brutal racial massacre targeted at blacks and resulted in the deaths of a larger number of African Americans. The incident is often referred to as the worst racial massacre in Texas history. Slocum was a small town in East Texas with a population of over 400 people, half of which was African Americans. The town was located in an area with a history of racial tensions and violence, and many white residents were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Prior to the massacre, a lynching of a black man in the nearby Cherokee County ignited racial tensions in the Slocum area. White rumors spread that black residents had been gathering in Slocum to plan an armed uprising. The tensions further escalated when a white man attempted to collect a disputed debt from a well-respected black farmer named Abe Wilson, and even worsened when an African American was put in charge of soliciting aid for road improvements by a road construction foreman. A confrontation ensued, enraging Jim Spurger, a local white farmer, who emerged as the primary instigator of the conflict that led to the massacre. Numerous newspapers and eyewitness accounts documented that Spurger initiated the events by alleging that blacks had threatened him. Fueled by Spurger and other white vigilantes, a furious mob consisting of heavily armed white men from various parts of Anderson County rampaged through Slocum in multiple groups. According to certain accounts, up to 200 men laid siege to the town, indiscriminately firing their guns at black residents. As survivors of the carnage spread the word, African Americans fled in terror. The white mobs pursued the fleeing blacks into the nearby forests and marshes, shooting them in the back. All initial newspaper reports depicted African Americans as armed instigators, which were severe distortions of the truth. Newspapers initially reported 8 to 22 deaths of black residents, but the black community claimed a minimum of 40 and potentially over 200 victims. The Anderson County Sheriff, William H. Black, found it challenging to determine the exact death toll due to the scattered bodies in the woods. Many black residents fled during and after the massacre, abandoning their assets to save their lives. White residents later seized their properties, such as Jack Hawley's dairy, granary, general store, and 700 acres of land, after he and his family escaped the town. The Slocum Massacre of 1910 is a reminder that the fight for equality and justice is historic, and that we must continue to work towards a more just and equitable society for all Americans. And as Black Americans strive for economic prosperity and improved welfare in Thibodaux, their efforts are faced with the most shocking form of opposition. Before we get into it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way in helping our message get pushed out to more people. Thank you for the support. Now let's move on to the next massacre. On November 23, 1887, black sugarcane workers in Thibodaux, Louisiana, sought to unionize and demand fair wages during the crucial harvest season. However, their peaceful protest ended in tragedy. These workers endured harsh conditions, long hours, and meager pay, with scripts that could only be used at plantation stores. The Knights of Labor, one of the few unions that organized black workers, encouraged the sugar cutters to demand $1.25 a day in cash. Despite unsuccessful attempts in the past, the cutters believed they could succeed during the rolling season when planter demands for workers was high. Junius Bailey, a 29-year-old schoolteacher and union leader, negotiated with growers for better conditions, but the negotiations failed and somehow resulted in a violent massacre. On November 22nd, when the growers refused to negotiate and terminated the union members, the workers called a strike. For the next 3 weeks, approximately 10,000 laborers, the largest farming industry strike, refused to work, affecting Lafourche, Terrebonne, St. Mary, and Assumption parishes. In the meantime, white vigilantes restricted Thibodaux, seeking to identify strikers and demanding passes from any black individuals entering or leaving town. As morning broke on November 23rd, gunfire erupted from the cornfield, injuring 2 white guards, a sad event which triggered the beginning of the massacre. The planters convinced former sugar planter and Democratic Governor Samuel D. McHenry to deploy several units of the all-white state militia. The militia, commanded by ex-Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard, brought a .45 caliber Gatling gun, while the paramilitary groups positioned themselves outside the Thibodaux courthouse. Both the militia and white vigilantes indiscriminately shot suspected strikers and any black people who crossed their path. Approximately 60 people were killed indiscriminately, with many of the strikers' bodies being discarded in unmarked graves. The killings continued to spread to other plantations, causing those who survived to hide in the woods and swamps. Despite being one of the deadliest events in U.S. labor history, the Southern white press praised the actions of the militia and vigilantes during the Thibodaux massacre. Andrew Price, a sugar planter who participated in the attacks, even won a seat in Congress in 1888. Many of those involved in the unlawful killings were honored with statues and public areas named after them, while the workers, including women and children, remained anonymous, with their murderers only recognized by their loved ones. It wasn't until the 1930s that black farm workers made another serious attempt at unionizing. Decades of sugar worker organizing came to an end after the massacre and the enactment of discriminatory state laws by white Democrats, which included the disenfranchisement of most black people. According to the historian John C. Rodrigue, defeated sugar workers were forced to return to the plantations on their employers' terms. This state of affairs persisted until the 1940s. Unfair, you will say, but the numbers keep increasing as we look at the massacre in Colfax, a small town in Louisiana. On April 13, 1873, the small town of Colfax, Louisiana, was the site of a battle-turned massacre between black and white residents. Approximately 150 black people and 3 white people were killed in the conflict. The massacre occurred in the aftermath of the highly contested Louisiana governor's race of 1872, which was won narrowly by the Republicans. Despite their victory, white Democrats were incensed and sought revenge. In Colfax Parish and other parts of the state, they organized the white militia to directly challenge the predominantly black state militia under the governor's control. Colfax political and racial divide in Louisiana at the time. The 4,600 voters in the 1872 election were split between approximately 2,400 mostly black Republican voters and 2,200 white Democratic voters. However, the incident sparked the Colfax massacre. On March 28th, local white Democratic leaders called for armed supporters to help them take the Colfax Parish courthouse from GOP office holders, also mostly black, to defend them. Although nothing happened on April 1st, fighting erupted between the two groups on the following day. On Easter Sunday, April 13th, more than 300 armed white men in Camellia and the Ku Klux Klan attacked the courthouse. When the white militia maneuvered a cannon to fire on the courthouse, some of the 60 black defenders fled, while others surrendered. The leaders of the attackers, James Hadnot, was accidentally shot by one of his own men, prompting the white militia to retaliate by shooting the black prisoners. Those who were wounded in the earlier battle, especially black militia members, were singled out for execution. The indiscriminate killing spread to African Americans who had not been at the courthouse and continued throughout the night. In total, around 150 African Americans were killed, with 48 being murdered after the initial battle. Only 3 militia under the control of Republican Governor William Kellogg arrived on April 14th and documented the violence. New Orleans police and federal troops also arrived in the following days to restore order. A total of 97 white militiamen were apprehended and charged with violating the U.S. Enforcement Act of 1870, also called the Ku Klux Klan Act. While a few were found guilty, they were released in 1875 when the U.S. court declared the Enforcement Act unconstitutional. However, no one was ever apprehended by the state of Louisiana or by intimidated local officials. And while this is gruesome, the massacre of East St. Louis indicates that there may have been some organized effort in America to take out black communities, silence their voices. In the early summer of 1980, St. Louis, Illinois, one of the most brutal and devastating racial events as African Americans migrated to East St. Louis, Illinois. African Americans migrated to East St. Louis, Illinois, attracted by job prospects in the wartime industries. This influx of Black workers into the city's industrial plants caused discomfort among many previously white residents who were not used to such a diverse population. What began as a series of labor disputes quickly escalated into a violent rampage as white Americans unleashed their fury on the city's Black community. Over the course of several days, between 39 and 150 African Americans were brutally murdered, while another 6,000 were left homeless. The destruction of property was also significant, with an estimated $4 in damages, $8.46 million in 2021. The riots were so severe that they have been described as the worst case of labor history. The brutality of the violence in World War I. In the words of historian Winston James, in April, Black soldiers were sent to fight for democracy, and in July, Black individuals were brutally killed in East St. Louis. Children were thrown into burning homes. People were trapped in their homes before being set on fire, and it was a horrific event, even by American standards. In the aftermath, the city was left in shambles, and many Black citizens left the city permanently. Despite the widespread destruction, the rioting was largely unchecked by local law enforcement, and the East St. Louis Chamber of Commerce called for the resignation of the police chief. The tragedy sparked a wave of protests across the country, with 10,000 Black citizens marching in silent protest in New York City in condemnation of the violence. The government's reaction to the East St. Louis massacre was inadequate and disappointing. Although President Woodrow Wilson expressed his condolences, he did not take any concrete action to address the situation. He refused to meet with a delegation of Black leaders who requested a meeting to discuss the issue. Additionally, the Illinois National Guard, responsible for maintaining order in the city, failed to protect Black residents from the violence. Overall, the government's response demonstrated a lack of concern for the well-being of Black individuals and a failure to uphold their rights as citizens. You may think this is upsetting until you realize how police officers rained down bombs on Black residents in Philadelphia.
And we're back in third quarter planning. Adams is quarterbacking this project, and she is looking for.
In 1985, the Philadelphia Police Department engaged in a confrontation with the Black Liberation Move organization, resulting in the destruction of residential homes in the Cobbs Creek neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States. In a show of force on May 13, 1985, approximately 500 police officers, led by City Manager Leo Brooks, attempted to remove Move members from a building and execute arrest warrants. To make the occupants leave, authorities shut off the water and electricity. At 5:35 a.m., Commissioner Sam Burr delivered a speech to Move members, giving them 15 minutes to exit the premises. When the group refused to comply, the police reported to dropping a bomb on the building, where 7 adults and 6 children were present. During the 90-minute-long standoff, Move members fired at police officers, who retaliated with tear gas and both semi-automatic and automatic firearms. Using over 10,000 rounds of ammunition, an officer was in the back. Finally, at 2 p.m., Commissioner Sambor ordered the bombing of the compound. While aboard a Pennsylvania State Police helicopter, Lieutenant Frank Powell of the Philadelphia Police Department dropped 2 bombs made of Covex, a dynamite substitute, along with 2 pounds of C4 provided by the FBI, onto a fortified bunker-like cubicle on the roof of the house occupied by Move members. The police referred to these bombs as entry devices. The bombs detonated after 45 seconds, causing the gasoline-powered generator to ignite and starting a fire that engulfed the house and destroy the bunker so that tear gas could be deployed and out the occupants. Firefighters arrived on the scene 30 minutes later, but were met with gunfire, causing them and police officers to retreat as the fire spread to neighboring houses. Only 2 Move members, Birdie Africa, who was 13 years old at the time, and Ramona Africa, managed to escape the burning building. Initially, police claimed that 2 men had also fled the house and fired at them, prompting a return of fire. However, Ramona Africa disputed this account, alleging that police had opened fire on those attempting to flee. The police countered by claiming that Move members had been shooting at them while moving in and out of the house. The fire department ultimately brought the blaze under control at 11:47 p.m. Tragically, the fire that resulted from the bombing claimed the lives of 11 MOVE members: Reese Africa, Frank Africa, Tree Africa, Netta Africa, Lufil Mas Africa. Additionally, the fire destroyed one neighboring homes, leaving approximately 250 individuals without a place to live. And while this was terrible, the Elaine massacre is a crazy occurrence that remains a scar in the annals of time. The year was 1919, and tensions were high in rural Arkansas. Phillips County, Arkansas, was once a hub for cotton plantations, with enslaved African Americans working the land before the Civil War. Even in the early 20th century, the county's population was still predominantly black, many of them working as illiterate farm laborers and sharecroppers. Despite the high number of African Americans in the community, the whitelist could be accustomed heavily to them, white plantation owners in lump sums, without listing items. The Elaine massacre was a culmination of various factors, including a long history of racial tension and discrimination in Arkansas, economic exploitation of black sharecroppers, years of growth of labor use of African farmers. In a group of black sharecroppers organized themselves in their living and working conditions. However, this was viewed as a threat by white plantation owners and businessmen who controlled the area's economy. A group of black farmers met in a church near Elaine to discuss how to gain fair prices for their crops. A group of white men, who feared that the meeting was actually a gathering of black militants planning an insurrection, interrupted the meeting, and a shootout ensued. Over the next several days, white mobs, including law enforcement officials and vigilantes, descended on the area and indiscriminately attacked black residents, including women and children. Reports vary, but it is estimated that anywhere from 100 to 800 African Americans were killed. 5 white people also lost their lives during the violence. The massacre was followed by a wave of arrests and trials of black residents, many of whom were massacre was the deadliest racial confrontation in Arkansas history, and one of the bloodiest in the history of the United States. Not only was this allowed to go down in history unchecked, but the hatred for blacks also continued to spread across the country. In 1921, African Americans had to deal with more trouble than racial and economic segregation, somewhere in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
This AI turns text into animated videos featuring real humans who speak anything.
In the aftermath of slavery, a glimmer of hope emerged in Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood district, dubbed the Black Wall Street. Purchased in 1906 by wealthy black landowner O.W. Gurley, the area provided a sanctuary for former black and sharecroppers fleeing from the racial tension to other regions. The thriving community their own right, but this progress was short-lived, as a horrific event would soon shatter the dreams and aspirations of the black community in Greenwood. On May 31st, the Greenwood district of Tulsa was ravaged by a brutal and devastating race massacre, leaving dozens of black residents dead and thousands homeless. The massacre began when a young black man named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator, sparking tensions simmering for years in a city deeply divided along racial lines. Despite no evidence of assault, Rowland was arrested and placed in a Tulsa jail. As rumors of an impending lynching of Rowland spread, a group of armed black men went to the courthouse house to protect him. A white mob met them, and a confrontation ensued. Shots were fired, and chaos erupted. The black men retreated to the Greenwood district, but the white followed, burning and looting homes, black community. They assisted the white mob in their destruction of the Greenwood district. Planes were even used to drop bombs on the areas. An estimated 300 people lost their lives within the district's 35 square blocks, more than the sheer magnitude of the destruction wrought upon the once flourishing Greenwood district during the Tulsa Massacre. The aftermath of the massacre was just as harrowing as the event itself. While the estimated damages totaled $1.4 million, experts suggest it underestimated the true cost. Survivors, the impact of the massacre was felt for generations to come. The Tulsa Massacre was felt for decades. It serves as a painful reminder of the deep-seated racism and violence that has plagued America for far too long. Thanks for watching today's documentary. We aren't just telling stories. We're changing lives and waking the culture up. Like and subscribe to the channel. The video on the screen shares some more hidden Black history that they never taught us in school.
Yeah. That's how we starting off February Truth. Just showing how they massacred our ancestors over there in the Western world, in America, in the Americas. They was destroying our people. And my whole purpose of this February Truth is to open the eyes of the youth and show them that there's hope. And you don't have to always live up under oppression. It's a whole world out here. Let's utilize it. Come up off the plantation. Because like I say, life is greater than just slaving 9 to 5s every day. Them people killed our ancestors. So yeah, that's my whole purpose of this February Truth, though, is just to open the eyes of the youth. And yeah, I'm gonna be doing this segment throughout the rest of this month, just showing true history and exposing the lies that they put out. The next segment that I'm going to do on this is going to be about Abraham Lincoln. And the reason why I'm doing that is because our people think they are free. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and this, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show that the slaves was never free. And that's going to be the next segment. So yeah, stay tuned. Most High willing, I'm gonna drop that tomorrow. We're gonna do this for the rest of the month, most High willing. And yeah, with that, shalom and see y'all